Welcome. Got some, wow, someone from Chicago. Tucson.
All right, I think we can get started whenever you all are ready.
I'm ready to go.
Okay, well, I just want to welcome everyone to our program today, our book talk and fireside chat with Francisco Galarte. Anita, is this the point where we tell people about the fireside, or does that come later?
You can tell them now.
Okay, so I hope you can see we actually have a fireside thanks to Anita, Dr. Anita Ravia. So we want to, this is real. This is literally a fireside chat, and we expect that this presentation will be fire. Get your fire emoji ready.
Yes.
So before we go any further, it's important to acknowledge the land that we are on. And so I'd like to invite my colleague, Dr. Kimberly Robertson, to do the land acknowledgement.
Thank you, Dion. Hische, Kimberly Robertson, Chaho Chifkados, Umadalwados Coweta, Moman, Umadalwados Big Springs. So hello, my name's Kimberly, and I come to you all from the Muskogee Creek Nation, which is in the southeast of the U.S. But I'm really honored and blessed to be here on unceded Tongva lands and to have wonderful relationships with the original inhabitants of this land. So I'll go ahead and read the Cal State LA land acknowledgement that we have been, that we are working to adopt on campus. And again, that's a Tongva acknowledgement, and it was drafted by myself and a tribal elder, Miss Julia Bogany. Okay. With great respect, Cal State LA acknowledges the Tongva people as the traditional caretakers of Tovangar, the Tongva world, including the Los Angeles Basin, South Channel Islands, San Gabriel and Pomona Valleys, and portions of Orange, San Bernardino, and Riverside counties. Cal State LA is located within these lands. As an institution located on unceded Tongva land, we pay our respects to the ancestors, elders, and our relatives' relations, past, present, and emerging. Consistent with our values of community and diversity, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible the university's relationship to Native peoples. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous sovereignty and will work to hold Cal State LA more accountable to the needs of American Indian peoples. Yeah, so with that, again, welcome. And I would encourage all of you you can go ahead and do a quick land acknowledgement of the folks whose land you're on in the chat, if you know whose land you're located on. And if you don't, then this is an invitation to, to reach out and do a little research, or, ask the folks in your community what they know about the American Indians or the First Peoples of the places you are. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. I just want to again say thank you to all of you for being here today. My name is Anita. I just wanted to thank our sponsors, the Department of Chicanx and Latinx Studies, Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies, and the Center for the Study of Genders and Sexuality Studies at Cal State LA. I'm a new profe here at Cal State LA, and I've only spent one semester on campus, but I'm really excited because my colleague, Profe Rafael Solorzano, was hired as one of the first Joteria study scholars in the nation to be hired in Chicano studies. And that's a big deal because we know we have a field that has historically been critiqued for homophobia, transphobia, patriarchy, and a lot of us have felt the woundings of those experiences, and Frank aptly speaks to them. So I just want to acknowledge that we come here with the intent to heal, we come here with the intent to love and to share space with our colegas and to share and model the way that we want to do good work here. So thank you, Frank, for being a part of our inaugural speaker series for Joteria and trans folks in the fields of Chicanx, Latinx studies, as well as women, gender, and sexuality studies, feminist studies, all areas that that already do cherish your work and will grow in leaps and bounds with your work. So thank you so much for that. We also want to acknowledge that our colegas, Eddie Alvarez and Audrey Silvestre, will be speaking in future pláticas. They've been invited as part of Profe Rafa's class and my class, but we're all, welcoming everybody to come to those. And we'll also highlight everybody else's classes or speakers if you want to share in the chat any queer and trans pláticas that you're hosting on campus or even outside of campus. We would love to have those. And I will share their articles as well as the dates that they'll be coming. They'll be April 8th and April 22nd. I'll share those in the chat in a second. Thank you again, everybody. It's really great to see you. Please enjoy the fire. As you know, fire, it can be magic. It can illuminate lots of love and healing and just like make us think of new growth and new change. So I welcome that growth and change with these pláticas.
Thank you so much, Anita, for getting us started. Thank you, Kimberly, for the lag acknowledgement and for the bienvenida, Dion. I really appreciate it. I'm excited to be here today. I'm excited to host, for us to host Frank, virtually. I just want to let you know, Frank, that if we were at Cal State LA, the auditorium would be filled, right? Everybody would have traveled to Cal State LA to see you from Nuevo Mexico, from Brawley, California, all the way from New York. I just want to let you know that there are many people with us today who are, seeing you through Facebook Live and also who are right now with us on Zoom. And before we begin, I want to go ahead and just share with all of you our Zoom housekeeping rules for today's fireside chat. So I want to go over some community guidelines. I want to share with you first that all of you right now are muted. And so we ask you to please remain muted and to be aware of your video and audio settings for the rest of the session. Toward the end, we're going to have a question and answer segment after our students share their reflections and questions with Frank. And so feel free to raise your hands or let us know in the chat so we may call on you to participate in the question and answer section. Also, feel free to show love. Feel free to show appreciation. Use your Zoom reactions, right? Your emojis, your claps. Throw up some hearts and some thumbs up to show some love during the talk, during Frank's book talk. And also, if you hear something you love and you appreciate, go ahead and share those reactions. And again, let us enjoy our time together. Let us enjoy our time around the fire. And also, we want to also let everybody know that we are prepared in case we have a Zoom bombing. And so I just want to let everybody know about our protocol for today. If someone decides to crash our event, we want to let everybody know that we're going to immediately mute everybody and we'll work on removing this unwanted guest from our session. If it continues, then what's going to happen is that we're going to proceed to shut down the talk and only invite our students back into the session. And so I hope that's okay with everybody, but we just want to take these precautions. And also, I just want to remind everybody that you can view us on our Chicana X Latinx Studies Facebook page. I'm going to go ahead and drop the link in the chat in case you can't see us on Zoom. You can see us on Facebook as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Rafael. And now the moment we've been waiting for. Well, first I want to start by saying that I'm very thankful for this collaboration with CLS, Chicanx Latinx Studies, and especially the collaboration with Profe Revilla and Solórzano. And just welcome you again to Cal State LA. And I look forward to future collaborations between CLS and WGSS. So I want to just tell you a little bit about the plan that's going to come up. So we're going to start with Dr. Galarte sharing a little about his book, the purpose of the book, the project of the book. So it'll be about half an hour. And then after that, we will have our moderated fireside chat with Dr. Galarte. And at that point, various students from our classes will ask questions, share comments and reflections about the book and the talk with Dr. Galarte. And then at the end, we will definitely take questions. And along the way, we are going to be reviewing the chat and see if any questions come up in the chat as well. So we're multitasking to get a sense of your, where you're at, what thoughts are coming forward for you through this talk. I'm also going to put a copy of the book link in the chat, so keep an eye out for that. Oops. And now, without further ado, I have the honor of introducing Dr. Francisco J. Galarte. So let me tell you about Dr. Galarte. Francisco J. Galarte is an assistant professor of American Studies and Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies at the University of New Mexico, where he teaches courses in Chicanx, Latinx, and transgender studies. He's also the director, of the Feminist Research Institute at the University of New Mexico. He was born and raised in Brawley, California, located in the Imperial Valley. It's sometimes called El Valle Imperial, right? Along the US-Mexico border, and identifies strongly as a transfronterizo, meaning that the borderlands inform his creative and scholarly projects. His most recent articles have appeared in publications including Aslan, Journal of Chicano Studies, Chicana Latina Studies Journal, and TSQ, Transgender Studies Quarterly. He's been involved with TSQ since the journal's inception in 2011 and served as the fashion editor from 2012 to 2018, and since 2018 has served as co-general editor of the journal. His research brings transgender studies, Chicanx studies, Latinx studies, and queer studies into critical dialogue. His primary scholarly agenda is to examine the relationship between systems of racial formation and the lived experiences and cultural representations of racialized transgendered subjects. His first book, Brown Transfigurations, Rethinking Race, Gender, and Sexuality in Chicanx Latinx Studies, published by the UT Press in January of this year, explores how transgender analytics intervene or fail to intervene in the current reading practices that exist in Chicana studies for making sense of processes of racialization, gendered violence, queer sexualities, masculinities, and femininities. Thank you, Frank.
Thank you so much, everyone. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. And of course, I wanted to be sure to, with everyone else, acknowledge the land and where I am. So founded in 1889, the University of New Mexico sits on the traditional homelands of the Pueblos and the original peoples of New Mexico. Pueblo, Navajo, and Apache, since time immemorial, have deep connections to the land and have made significant contributions to the broader community statewide. We honor the land itself and those who remain stewards of this land throughout the generations, and also acknowledge our committed relationship to Indigenous peoples. We gratefully recognize our history. I also very much want to thank all of the organizers of this, Dr. Espinosa, Dr. Revilla, Dr. Hines, and of course, Dr. Solorzano for this gracious invitation, and thank you for everyone who is here and attending this talk. I'm going to talk a little bit about how the book came about, what the aim is for the book, and then I'm also going to talk a little bit about. I'm going to read a little from the coda for those of you who haven't read the book or are thinking about buying the book. I'll read a little bit from it so that you can make a decision as to whether this is a book you want to pick up. So the book came about, it's been about 10 years in the making or so, and the book itself transitioned in the ways that I transitioned in my life. I understand the book to have its early iterations in my master's degree when I wrote my master's thesis at the University of Illinois. At that particular time, I was writing about female masculinity in the context of like Chicana Butch performance, text, and so really working and grappling with racialized genders and racialized masculinity started that early on, and maybe even a lifetime ago. I was gonna put up a childhood picture and talk about how, you know, really I think I wrote this book for the child in me, the person that I wanted to be, and for others who are trans or who have loved ones who are trans, in the sense that I wanted to create a new vocabulary and a new way that we can talk about masculinity and femininity within Chicanx and Latinx cultures, and with our families, and with, you know, how we move through the world. So the book itself is organized around these particular figures that I excavated and that I really wanted to bring to the fore, to really kind of tell a story around these figures, about trans Chicanx, Latinx life. And so the book itself does not grapple with like it's not a historical project. I'm not trying to narrate a history of trans Chicanx and Latinx people. I'm really trying to give us a vocabulary and a way and a form to talk about racialized gender in a different type of way, and to also talk about citizenship, and to also talk about culture. So the book itself is organized around a binary in some ways. So the first two parts of the book are organized around trans femininity. And in those first two chapters, I grapple with the narratives and the stories and the lives of two trans Mexican American women who unfortunately were very brutally murdered in the early 2000s. And so one of these figures is Gwen Araujo, and the other is Angie Zapata. Gwen Araujo is a case that I have a particular attachment to, because Gwen Araujo herself was born in Raleigh, California, my hometown. And, you know, coming into contact and knowing that someone who was trans like Gwen Araujo, who lived in the same hometown as myself, was very powerful to me. That just wasn't something that I would ever thought that I would encounter in my lifetime, to know about or to understand a history or life of a person who came from my hometown in the Imperial Valley. And so I grapple with the representations of Araujo through the made-for-TV movie, A Girl Like Me. And so what I do is I look at how this particular film seeks to narrate Araujo's story for a general audience, in the sense that the film relies on particular tropes about Chicano culture, and ultimately, you know, blames her mother, Sylvia Guerrero, for her daughter's kind of transness, right? So the idea is that the way that her mother raised her is, you know, in a sense, leads Gwen Araujo to end up being trans and to meet the fate in which she does. And so my reading there is to really kind of show, or kind of push back against all these assumptions of impossibility of what it would be to be trans in a Chicanx kind of cultural context. The second chapter in Angie Zapata is where I grapple with citizenship and nativism. In Angie Zapata's case, she was murdered in Greeley, Colorado, which is also a rural area. And in Greeley, Colorado, in the early 2000s, after the Mega March, has a big mass protest around anti-immigrant legislation in the early 2000s that happened. In that context, there were mass raids in a bunch of meatpacking plants in the Midwest and in Colorado. And so one of these large raids happens in Greeley, where Angie Zapata lives. And so that is an opening that I use to really kind of excavate the nativist history of the area, and to really kind of question the extent to which, you know, we can think about a conviction on a hate crimes charge for the perpetrator in Angie Zapata's murder. Are the jurors really kind of, you know, finding this man guilty because they care about trans life, right? Or trans death, right? Or value Angie Zapata in some type of way? Or if they are really kind of inclined to very easily and readily convict a, you know, Chicano man. He's, you know, has a kind of aesthetic of what we would think of as gang members, or what the jurors in this particular rural town would understand to be gang members. He had been incarcerated before, and part of his incarceration, he is linked to being a part of gang activity. So what I do is I excavate the stories of the narratives around Angie Zapata's death, and then also the narratives around her perpetrator, Alan Andrade, in the context of this nativist history of the area and the region, to really kind of call to question whether or not the guilty conviction in the murder of Angie Zapata is a win for transgender rights, which it was regarded to be because it happened right before the passage of the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. hate crimes law. So Angie Zapata's case and narrative was essentially used in testimony on the Senate floor by the senators in Colorado to say, we have to pass this federal hate crimes law because people in my jurisdiction are being killed, and Colorado is a place where we value transgender people. So that's the first half of the book. The second half of the book is about transmasculinity. It's about transgender men and the battles around, trans masculinity in a sense. So one chapter I grapple with the work of Shireen Moraga, another Chicana lesbian feminist, in and how they are figuring Chicana lesbian feminism and the attachments to, or the battle for, kind of female masculinity. And so I do that by looking at Moraga's work over time. And in doing that, I'm really wanting to show that in the time that Moraga and her contemporaries are writing in the early 90s is also a time in which there is intense anti-trans threads within second wave feminism. And so I'm showing that even though Moraga and her contemporaries are not saying, we don't want trans women in our spaces, or, we are trans is, and is bad. Some of that discourse makes its way into the writings, especially the attachments to biological essentialism around sex and the enforcement of that. And so I'm not saying, that they were writing anti-trans things, but I'm saying we can read the discourse of second wave lesbian feminism into some of the theorization of sexual politics and gender politics in Chicana lesbian feminism in the 1990s. And then it really kind of comes to a head in Moraga's more recent work. And so encountering Moraga's more recent work in the Chicana Dyke Codex, which caused a big controversy, and a lot of people, especially in my circles who work in Chicano studies and Chicana feminism specifically, right? There was an intense move to want to defend and to really kind of shut down any criticism of what a particular essay, the work that a particular essay did. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to really look back at an overview, doing a really in-depth reading and look at her work and kind of see if there's a way that the work builds to this particular moment. And I would say that it does. And that's what the reading does. And in that chapter, I also propose a different way to read a novel from that era by Galarte Trujillo, which is called What Night Brings. And in that novel, I'm reading for a trans child or a trans childhood. I'm not saying that the character of that novel itself is a trans child, but I ask that we don't need to foreclose the possibility for this, right? So the book is usually narrated as a coming of age, young lesbian novel, young little Chicana butch who is amazing, adorable narrator. And within the story, we see all these moments in which there's a foreclosure of transness. And so I ask us to read against that and to really grapple with what a trans childhood might look like, right? In the present at that time, it is a possibility. And I think trans children are kind of really severely under attack in our contemporary time and moment in especially right now at this time in more conservative states. And so I think it has a lot of resonance in that particular context. The second chapter, what I do is I really want to work with figurations of transmasculinity. And what I do is I use Antonio Viego's work, which is psychoanalysis. He uses Lacan. And in trans studies of psychoanalysis, we also use Lacan. There's a concept of the symptom. And what I do is I try to bring together the work from Latino studies and transgender studies to be able to talk about racialized transmasculinity. And the link between the two in that example is the concept is the pachuca or the pachuco. And so what I do is I make that link, and then I move to a medical case study that I uncovered from 1969 about a Mexican-American trans man who comes into contact with gender clinics in the mid-century. And so he comes into contact with gender clinics in a time in which most people who are going to gender clinics in the 1960s are writing to psychologists to say, hey, I read about this study, or hey, I read Harry Benjamin's book, and so I want to have care, I want to seek out surgery, I want hormones. The person that I uncover, CK, only comes in contact with a gender clinic because he's arrested. He's arrested and he's forced to undress in front of the police. And it's discovered that he is, quote unquote, not a man, and is referred to the gender clinic. He is diagnosed as being transsexual, and it's recommended that he gets the care that was recommended at the time, which is hormones and a bilateral mastectomy. Ultimately, the hospital decides to deny him care. And so what I do is I do a close reading of that particular study to really point to how he differs from other subjects at that time who are writing and seeking out care from gender clinics, and ultimately demonstrate how the gender clinic itself is not really equipped to deal with a complex transmasculine figure like CK, because CK, English is not his first language. He has a different language for understanding his sexuality, and those are misread by the doctor in different types of ways. And the hospital ultimately decides to deny him care because they feel that a case like CK's would bring unnecessary attention. And presumably, I understand that to be, it would create a link where other racialized non-English speakers would come to this hospital in Oregon to presumably access care. And this is not a population that I understand and other scholars would understand as a population that a hospital like the University of Oregon, which is the hospital that he was sent to, would want to spend their money on giving care to these types of subjects, especially in 1969. I also do the reading of this to demonstrate that, prior to the 1990s, right, which is this moment of extreme visibility for transmasculinity, there are racialized transmasculine subjects who are living in the world, not necessarily accessing care through these formalized settings like gender clinics, but rather fashioning transmasculinity in a way that allowed them to realize their embodiment, to realize who they were, and to have a life, in other words, and presumably a future. Fortunately for CK, I think that future gets curtailed and cut off. And the final chapter, which I'm going to read a little bit from, is the coda. And this is where I grapple with the question of the X and non-binary. And so that's the organization and kind of the overview of the book. And for me, writing this book was, as I mentioned, was very important and very personal. One, because I myself, transitioned and changed as I was writing this book. And that change necessitated me reorienting my attachments to particular concepts and particular texts. And so that really comes into play when I'm writing about Chicano feminism, right? And these scholars that I learned how to talk about gender and sexuality with, right? And so changing that orientation opened up a different way for me to understand transmasculinity and femininity. And that's where trans studies kind of came into play for me. So I'm not saying that trans studies makes Chicanx or Latinx studies better. I'm saying that each of them complement the other when we're dealing with complex embodiments that, really kind of push us to think in a different way. So, and sometimes trans studies pushes me to read a particular scene or a particular text in a way that Chicanx studies hits a limitation. Sometimes there's a way in which trans studies hasn't done the work to get me to where I need to go in terms of reading another situation. And that would be a really important example of that would be the cases of Angie Zapata and Buena Rajo. I think the only way in which trans studies really knows how to talk about racialized trans feminine subjects is through their death. And I do talk about their deaths, but I do really try to do it in a way that is not extractive and really looks at how Chicanx and Latinx studies can give me the tools to really excavate the everydayness of their life or the context in which they lived that might have contributed to their brutalization and their deaths in the first place. So I'm really looking at how trans studies and Chicanx and Latinx studies complement each other in different ways. And really, I think this is a big part of how I navigate the world, right? So who I am as a racialized subject is a trans Chicano, Chicanx man, right? I live within both of those worlds. And so I wanted to bring that particular reading practice into the text that I bring together in this book. And I also really wanted to create a text that shows bits and pieces of stories that I otherwise didn't know about when I was in college, when I was, taking courses in Chicanx and Latinx studies. That's also a really big and important piece of this, because I do think that we need to understand the contributions of Guanarajo's life, of Angie Zapata's life, the writings of Shuri Moraga, to read them and revisit them with different eyes. Also the writings of course, Carla Trujillo. And then finally, the life of CK and the documentary Mind If I Call You Sir, which came out in the 2000s by a filmmaker in San Francisco. And then the coda that I'll read from today, I'm going to go ahead and read from it a little bit. And Rafa, if you could pull up these photos, that would be great. And so I'll end there, and then we can go into Q&A if that sounds good. Am I doing okay on time?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. Perfect. So, all right. So I've organized my argument around a binary, focusing first on the narratives of two trans Chicanas Latinas, and then on the figure of the trans Latino Chicano. Minding the binary seems like an unorthodox approach for reorienting discussions on how to think about gender within Latina, Latino, Latinx, and Chicana, Chicano, Chicanx studies. I continue to ponder on Chu and Drager's assertion that, quote, the most powerful intervention scholars working in trans studies can make at this juncture within the academy is to defend the claim that transness requires we understand, as we never have before, what it means to be attached to a norm, by desire, by habits, by survival, unquote. However, at the same time, I ask myself what it might mean to understand, as we never have before, similar attachments to norms in Chicana, Chicano, Chicanx, and Latina, Latino, Latinx studies, without reifying the rigidity of the field's sex, gender, sexuality paradigms. In the context of these fields, the introduction of the X has revealed how in Chicano, Chicana, Chicanx, and Latina, Latino, Latinx studies, as scholars, we continue to be attached to norms, an important example being the purity of the Spanish language. The norms at stake in the discussions around the standardization of the use of the X are related to gender and language. The most potent argument for the use of the X is that which focuses on the significance of gender neutrality that the X promises. Stacy K. Sowards notes that this kind of gender neutralization in the Spanish language of nouns, articles, indirect objects, and groups of people creates more inclusive and accepting language, particularly for transgender and queer folks. Roy Perez asked that, quote, we understand language as one medium among many for making political interventions, end quote. And he notes that the instability of the X might prove useful. In further elaboration on the stakes related to gendered language, Perez observes that although the stakes around gendered language might not feel high to some, they may be very high for others. He adds that as a supplement and not a substitute, Latinx offers a decent alternative to the unnecessary imposition of gender. The observations by Sowards and Perez come from a dialogue among Latina, Latino, Latinx studies scholars that was moderated by Catalina de Ones. I'm going to turn here and skip a little bit to the work of Viego, who also talks about the X. And Viego understands that the X provides an aural, so kind of a sonic reconfiguration of Latina O that challenges the primacy accorded to the visual register in the culture where it reigns. One hears Latinx, one cannot say that one sees Latinx. He also asserts, one might say the angle of vision changes with Latinx, and so it makes possible quite literally new ways of seeing. But as the term, it does not make a substance miraculously appear that would definitionally represent it. Viego adds that we must be open to the explosive plasticity of the term. Like Viego, I am interested in what the X points towards and how it might bend. He posits that among the things we might encounter are moments of rupture, silence, sociopolitical and ethno-racial familial traumas that cannot be delivered in speech. Relatedly, in Macarena Gomez Barres and Licia Fiol Mata's conceptualization of Latinx, the X turns away from the dichotomous toward a void, an unknown, a wrestling with plurality, vectors of multi-intentionality, and the transitional meanings of what has yet to be seen. Diego's observations moved me to read with the X to further understand how it might reconfigure the oral and visual registers of Latina and Latino and Chicana and Chicano. And so in writing the coda, I want to talk a little bit about these two photographs that you see in front of you by Anthony Friedkin. And these photos are of a figure or a person named Jim Aguilar. And so Jim Aguilar has many names. Jim Aguilar was known as Jim Aguilar, Jaime Aguilar, Pretty Jim, and Ariana. And so I turned to these photos and I encountered these photos through an essay by Rob Hernandez. And so I first learned of Jaime as Hernandez names him in his essay, Drawn from the Scraps, The Finding Aids of Mundo Mesa. Hernandez describes him, as the transgender artist collaborator, Jaime Aguilar. And as soon as I saw this, I conducted further research to discover who this person was. From Hernandez's essay, I learned that Jaime was featured in Anthony Friedkin's 1973 self-published series, Gay, a photographic essay. A quick internet search led me to photos from the series, and I was instantly moved by the portraits Friedkin had taken of Jim, the name that is given to a series of photographs of Aguilar in this collection. Before moving into analysis of these photos, I think it's important to note that all the remnants of Jim, Jaime, Ariana exist in proximity to some of the most significant queer Chicano artists in the post-1960s avant-garde scene. Aguilar's likeness was featured heavily in promotion for the Access Mundo Queer Network's in Chicano LA exhibition organized by the One National Gay and Lesbian Archives at the University of Southern California Libraries with the Museum of Contemporary Art, Los Angeles, as part of the Getty Initiative Pacific Standard Time LA, and was curated by Sion Dean Chavoya and David Evans France. According to the curators, Chavoya and France, the exhibition charts a, quote, network of affinities, connections, affiliated aesthetic and conceptual practices, and political alignments. And the exhibition shows how artists worked across shared spaces, collaborative groups, and through the correspondence and exchange from the late 1960s to early 1990s. The show takes its theme from the social and artistic networks that revolved around Chicano avant-gardist Edmundo Mundo Mesa, and Jim Jaime Ariana was a member of Mesa's social network. She appears in the collection in photographs selected from Friedkin's Gay essay and Joey Terrell's Homeboy Beautiful. Jim Jaime Ariana is a peripheral figure in an exhibition that is majority gay male. The critic Lucas Hildebrand praises the exhibition for the curator's anti-binaristic approach to identity and genre. But this approach also relegates gender nonconforming figures such as Jim Jaime Ariana to the periphery. So I'm going to talk, I want to make sure we have time for your students that have prepared questions. So I'm just going to read a tiny bit more and then we can move on to that because I do want to talk about the photo that's on the left, where it's a full body shot of Jim Ariana. So here I'm going to talk about these photos that were taken at Troopers Hall in 1970. So in this photo, immediately the viewer is drawn in by Aguilar's melancholic gaze, eyes looking downward, partially closed, and arched eyebrows marked by the shimmer of dramatic eye makeup. The viewer can then admire the sartorial details of Aguilar's ensemble in the photo. The delicate scarf adorns Aguilar's neck, and the ring on their hand is complemented by a brooch on the wide-shouldered blazer and high-waisted, flawlessly creased slacks. France describes Aguilar's gender presentation in another photo in the series as soft and androgynous, with the clothing and makeup speaking to the, quote, gender-bending extravagance of glitter rock that was beginning to influence the young people at Troopers, end quote. My interest lies in the silence of Jim in the photo. In contrast to what would be cacophonous surroundings, everything about the photo but Aguilar is loud. The shimmer of Aguilar's makeup is loud and dramatic, but his, her, their pose and gaze. It is his, her, their pose and gaze that quiet the photo. As explained by Tina Camps, the choice to listen rather than simply look at images is a conscious decision to challenge the equation of vision with knowledge by engaging photography through a sensory register, sound. Camp adds that sound need not be heard to be perceived, and one can easily imagine the muffled sounds of disco music making its way into the bathroom from the dance floor, voices engaged in conversations, hookups, or even arguments in the small bathroom. Yet when the viewer gazes upon Aguilar seemingly at the margins of it all, the sonic quality of the photo, the silence may produce a desire to know more and wonder what is happening outside the frame. Aguilar is backed up to the wall, head tilted downward and eyes partially closed, captured in a moment of pensive respite or pleasure. The viewer is not privy to what Aguilar might be feeling. Here, the restroom appears to be a haven for Aguilar, pushing against the dominant constructions of the restroom as a complex and fraught space for trans and gender nonconforming people. Friedkin's photos that feature Aguilar are taken in proximity to gay male culture, with Aguilar engaging in, ignoring, or witnessing whatever is outside the frame. Franz refers to Aguilar's style as, quote, gender bending, and as a Chicano reader, I cannot ignore the perfect crease on Aguilar's pants. It cuts the frame and insinuates a stark contrast between hard and soft that Franz misses in his reading of the photo that is not a full body shot. The cut of the crease opens up another way to index the complexity of Aguilar's gender presentation as related to, but apart from simply gender bending. It is not Jim's sartorial style that affectively punctuates the photo. It is the quietness of his gaze, or lack of, that draws the viewer in. So that is from the coda. And just to speak really quickly about this other photo, this is taken in East Los Angeles, where Jim's mother, where he lived with his family. So we see just very quickly the graffiti kind of blending in with him in this environment. And so this is similar to kind of the reading that I give in conversation with this last reading, because we have the hard and the soft again, but then the hardness is in the barrio, right? As opposed to the club or restroom space that is a gay space. So working with that contrast to really kind of bring out how we might think of a non-binary, or the kind of the promise, or the what it might mean to look with an X. So I'm going to go ahead and stop there, and I'm happy to answer questions from students or anyone here. I have lots to say, obviously, but I just wanted to kind of give you a piece, a little preview of the writing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Frank, for that amazing book talk. Please, everybody, if you can all join me with aplausos, with hearts, thumbs up. Can we show him some love? Thank you so much. One of the key things that we would like to do now, Frank, and I think we have shared this with you, for the portion of this program, I think you did this earlier, where you were in conversation with Ricky Rodriguez, where he commented on your book. And so we wanted to flip that, right? We love academics, we respect them, we honor them. But this time around, we actually want to hear from our students. We had 4 classes this semester who are reading your book. And so we want to center their voices. We want to allow them to ask their questions, share their reflections or resonance with your book. And so we want to open it up to our 4 classes and our students, again, to share their commentary. And so you can hear them and how your book is moving them. And so I would like to first invite up Profesora Anita Tijerina from the Department of Chicana X and Latinx Studies to say a little bit about your class and also your students.
Gracias, Rafa. Thank you, Frank. Thank you so much for sharing your work. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I just want to acknowledge that there's 109 people on the Zoom call, and I'm sure more folks with us on Facebook, and of course, collective groups in different rooms, including Frank's family, just honoring you once again, and just thank you for being here with us. Again, I'm a new profesora in Chicanx Latinx Studies at Cal State LA. I'm teaching a upper division, actually a grad seminar that I also offer for upper division to undergraduate students. It's interdisciplinary, and one of the things that we're trying to do, or that I'm trying to do in this class and that my colegas have done, is just offer students what's new in the field, right? So we know that these fields are constantly growing. And one of the things that my students did, they just presented last night on your work. They read your book, and it's new to them, and some of the words are hard, and they're challenging for some of even myself to wrap my mind around. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity for us to grapple with the work, right, and to learn new things. It's always beautiful to learn. But again, I want to thank you for expanding our field. One of the videos that they showed was when someone asked you, like, how do you fit your work in the field of Chicano studies? And I think your response was like, I don't know that Chicano studies is ready for us, for my work or myself. So I would just want to say, like, we're ready for you, and we welcome you and we embrace you. And then I want to introduce my student who is my mentee and queer tea and mujerista tea, Jessica Avila Barojas. She's a fabulous first year MA student in the Department of Chicano and Chicanx Latinx Studies. And her focus is artivism and creativity for undocumented and queer resistance. She's an artist herself, and she's doing fabulous work. Of course, she wants to do all kinds of different research, but she's volunteered to ask a question, and she's here tonight. Jessica, can you please say anything about yourself or any questions or resonance that you'd like to offer Frank tonight?
Hi, thank you, Profe Anita, for the introduction. First off, I did want to thank you, Professor Galarte. I felt like as I was reading the book, I didn't just stay with the book. I went on and I started listening to some of the podcasts where you were interviewed in. And as Profe Anita mentioned, a lot of my work has to do with like personal stuff that as an artist myself, as an undocumented person myself, as a queer person myself. So my question kind of goes around that area. I noticed in one of the podcasts, you mentioned that at times it was difficult to write the book because it's so close to your relationship or your positionality as a trans Chicano man. And my question is if you have advice for scholars like myself and other scholars who are doing work that really, the research is really reflective of our experiences, and we're in the middle of like the healing process while simultaneously facing systemic violence. And like, what does that look like?
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much, Jessica, for your question and for. I mean, I feel like you've listened to me so much at this point. It must be tired of my voice, but thank you for that, and I'm deeply appreciative of of, of you doing that. And so I think for me, when I talk about this being hard, it's literally right. Like you are growing and changing, and things are really not kind of certain. And when you are writing for tenure, you're not writing for yourself. It's an imposed timeline, which makes it really kind of hard and painful in different types of ways, apart from the way that it's painful as we're living our lives. I think that, therapy is important for sure. Having a therapist that you can, trust and go to, really kind of leaning into your family. And then also knowing that some days you don't write, and some days and that could be like more than a few days, it could be a month, it could be two. And for me, writing this book was hard because I didn't want it to, I wanted to create as much distance as I possibly could, in the sense that I didn't include my personal narrative, which I have in other writings, because I really wanted to create a body of work that had multiple points of entry. And I think that the different texts that I put together create that. And so that creates kind of a healthy medium or a healthy space for me personally when I was reading the text and then finally writing about the text. And then, one of the things that really kind of underpins the book is loss. I mean, loss is hard to grapple with, right? Whether it's a familial loss, whether it's any kind of loss, really. And that is really a big part of the book, and I think that's okay. I think being okay with loss really can be generative, right? So, you know, it's not that we take on something in place, right, of what we've lost, but, you know, understand how that loss might motivate us or move us or propel us in different types of ways. So, you know, there's different forms of navigating the, you know, the violence, the brutality of the lives we live. And then there's also the attachments that we have to what we want to write about, and really kind of understanding that those attachments of what we want to write about and feeling like you have to write about something is important. And every single story or narrative that I wrote about in this book, I felt like I had to tell this story. And so that's what makes me the happiest about the book being finished and out in the world, is because I knew that I had to tell them. And it took me a long time to find the tools to be able to tell them in the way that I have. And so it's a process. Thank you so much for your question.
Gracias, Jessica. Gracias, Frank.
The next profe that I would like to invite up is La Doctora Dion Espinosa, who will introduce her class and her students.
So I'm Professor Dion Espinosa from Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies. Hi, Dr. Galarte. And that's just in case I hadn't introduced myself before, so that's why I said. So Dr. Galarte, I want to thank you for this work. I just read one chapter in the intro, and I think the writing is beautiful. I want to say that. I really felt drawn in. I think there was a real care taken with the narratives and how you draw out the analysis. So thank you for what it feels to me very poetic. And at the same time, it is a challenge, I think, for different, you know, people who maybe they're reading theory for the first time. So the course that's here today is actually my WGSS 3000 Theories in WGSS class. This is a course for students in the major and in the minor. We have a BA degree now. We just brand new, fall 2017. And so this course surveys WGS theories, including feminist, queer, trans theory, post-colonial, decolonial theory, and critical race theory. So it's a lot in 15 weeks with juniors, mostly juniors are in the class. And one of the things that really, I think, stuck with us was the idea of the borderlands. And 3 students gave an excellent presentation on chapter 3 on the Chicana X Butch and Chicano X FTM borderlands. They really did an amazing job of unpacking that chapter. And although none of the people presenting are actually going to comment right now, their presentation brought out a discussion. And so I'd now like to invite Alfred Salas, who's a senior in liberal studies and a minor in WGSS, who is going to share a comment with you.
Thank you, Dr. Espinosa, and thank you, Dr. Galarte. It's a pleasure for me to be here, and I'm really happy and nervous. So in the discussion that we were having, there was, well, let me get the quote that started it all. I don't know why this resonated with me, but in the student's presentation on chapter 3 of your book, it says, the quote was, "The borderland is created by the pain, the dolor, experienced by both trans men and butch lesbians." And being from that community of within the LGBTQ community, I call it the umbrella, where I don't know if it's more of a question or a comment, but there seems to be like this, because you used the word discourse, and within that community, there's so much oppression and discrimination within the group that I just don't understand how, all of us as a group within that umbrella, we've all been marginalized. And I just, what is your thought on, like, I don't understand that, because even like at the beginning of the gay activism, like after Stonewall in 1969, and then, the narrative has always been away from people of color. So like, the ones that were very active back then in the 70s, like Sylvia Rivera, Marsha B. Johnson, you never hear of them. Now you are, but before it was always towards, anybody but people of color, because they try to, glorify a certain, population, right? So, but they always neglect the people of color. So within the context of the LGBTQ umbrella, I hope I'm asking this or a comment, do you sense that frustration where, like for me, it's a frustration where I don't understand how like there can be discrimination or oppression within, because I would think that if we were together and we wouldn't be, oh, trans are not invited, it's only lesbians and gay men, or that we would be stronger. So I just feel like it's a frustration that even within the group there's so much divide in, like you said, discourse. So like do you have any thoughts on that? Or yeah, and thank you for letting me ask the question or my comment.
Thank you, Alfred.
Thank you so much, Alfred. I think this is a great question. I think your reference to Silvio Rivera really kind of hits the nail on the head, in the sense that if we recall kind of the famous moment that Tourmaline has recuperated, where, Silvio Rivera was not allowed to be at this huge gay pride event after Stonewall, right? And forces her way on stage and is booed. And, she kind of calls to question all of the gay and lesbian folks, primarily white gay and lesbian folks, but presumably there may have been people of color who also didn't approve of Rivera, who was, a trans woman who did sex work, right? Who, traversed in a world that is not kind of was thought of as bringing the movement down in particular ways. And so, thinking about that moment and then thinking about where we are now, I begin the book with that scene with Jenny Gutierrez, if you remember. To me, that's a kind of reiteration of what that was in a particular moment, where Jenny Gutierrez, as a trans activist, is invited to the White House as part of a kind of gala or luncheon. And, she calls out President Obama for all of the LGBT migrants who are incarcerated and detained in ICE detention. After Obama in his comments says, we continue to have so many trans women who die. And so that was just kind of like the tipping point, I understand it, for Gutierrez to call him out, right? To kind of misbehave, so to speak, right? And everyone turns on her. And so in the context of that chapter you're talking about, in terms of like the Butch FTM borderlands, if you're able to watch the film where I'm writing about, Mind If I Call You Sir, this is a really good kind of demonstration of kind of similar misreadings of each other, right? In the early 2000s and 1990s, where butch lesbians and FTMs, right, female to male trans men are misreading each other. Even though they share that racialized position, they're misreading what masculinity means and how it works in relationship to their bodies, right? So for trans men, the way there's an assumption that if they are passing as men, they are enjoying a lot of privileges around what that might be. And then for butch lesbians, it's that these, trans men are coming in to be kind of competition or to enter these bar spaces. And when we look at what was going on in San Francisco at the time, FTM, trans men weren't really going to lesbian bars. And they weren't necessarily they were communicating with each other in a FTM newsletter group that was started by Liz Sullivan, who was a white trans community historian. And so what I understand that particular moment to be is a series of misreadings, right? And also kind of functioning from what Judith Halberstam, understands us to think of masculinity as a limited resource, right? Especially in a racialized context where we really want to hold on to what masculinity looks like in relationship to certain types of bodies. So I think that butch lesbians have their own kind of understanding and import meaning on terms of what racialized kind of queer masculinities is. And I think that trans men, right, because they fold into the world as kind of leaning into a norm, like the idea that we wouldn't know that they're there, what is the burden of that invisibility? And then what is the burden of the hypervisibility to be read as a man of color, right, in at large of the world? So, kind of looking at that kind of competition within the discourse, it's a series of misreadings, and then it's also about calling into question, I understand it, having a thing about a politics of respectability, right? Like who gets to be a respectable subject that we value, that we look up to as a role model, that is going to get us to be recognized by capitalist structures, by, all of the structures that are presumably going to give us the rights that we so need and crave. And in the book, I'm really asking us to not look towards those particular structures, but look inwards into the community and understand how we might feel a sense of togetherness through something like dolor, right? Like pain. Pain is something that we all experience. Some of us experience in relationship to our gender, to our sexuality, to our racial position, or a combination of the three. And so kind of leaning into that, leaning into loss, and kind of understanding how it might be generative around whatever political issue you're thinking about, whatever kind of cultural text or cultural moment. That's what I'm asking us to do when we're bringing kind of trans and brown together. And the figurations that are in the text, like these discourses, I'm trying to flesh out those misrecognitions and give us a different way to think about these particular moments. Thank you so much for your question.
Thank you, Dr. Galarte.
So Frank, I'm up next. So hello, everybody. My name is Professor Rafael Solorzano. I'm also a new professor in the Department of Chicana Latinx Studies here at Cal State LA. And I'm fortunate enough to teach classes on social movements, immigration, and Joteria studies. And this particular semester, I am teaching an intro to Joteria studies. And I am very fortunate enough to have students that are from across all disciplines in my class, not only in art from our department, but also from the Department of Women, Gender, Sexuality Studies, from sociology, anthropology. And also we read the whole book, Frank, and we loved it. And one of the key things I just want to share real quickly is that every week my students write Sentepesantes. And one of the key things about these Sentepesantes is that I push them to write about what their body's feeling when they read your book, right? It's not only to analyze your book, but to also share with us what are the emotions that are running through their book. And we always do a body scan, right? We kind of do a body scan before we begin a plática around our readings. And so I want to share with that because I just want to say that many of our students have felt emotional reading your book. They love your book. They're excited about your book, and they do feel the dolor that you write about. And so the next student I want to introduce is our student Jose Llanos, who is a graduate student in anthropology. And so I know that we only have 7 minutes, and so we'll go ahead and take his question. And if Kimberly's student is here, they can also drop their question in the chat. And then we definitely want to give some time to take questions from the participants and then have our book raffle at the end. So we'll invite Jose up to ask his question.
Hi, Dr. Galarte. First off, thanks for this book. It really informed me about different, issues around transness in general, and me as a queer man that I wasn't aware of because, I'm not part of that specific community. But I wanted to ask, since, anthropology is very problematic when it comes to research, especially people of color, my research is focused on queer people of color and identity. So how do you navigate like the nuances of identity in research in terms of like the academy? Because I know we want to categorize everything and give a label, a name, a box. And in my undergraduate research, I found out a lot of things don't fit in these boxes, don't have the names. And I had a hard time kind of articulating that was satisfactory to school, that they would approve of this research. So how did you navigate those intricacies?
Thank you so much, Jose, for your question and for your comments. And I want to say that I have a lot of respect for you as an anthropologist, in the sense that I understand anthropologists to be people that have like a key skill of talking to people. And so I can never do a project where I'm talking to people and I have to draw out the stories like the chismes and stuff, because I feel like I'm being too kind of insertive or too like, I just don't have that nuance. You have to have that nuance. Like my mom is here and she knows I'm not a big talker. Most of the people in my family were not like, big conversationalists. And so for me, that was my limitation, right? Where I knew that I could have approached this study by gathering people together, right? Or observing or doing like ethnography or collecting oral histories. And I knew that I was something I wouldn't be able to do well. And I think that there is certainly a way to be able to work with communities and alongside communities in a way to really kind of bring some nuance to their identities and their stories and their histories. And so if anything, I understand my book as giving a kind of language and a form to, you know, if someone's going to go out and to do that work, to be attuned to different ways to approach identity, how people talk about their bodies, how they talk about their culture, how they talk about their experiences, right? And then also being mindful of, you know, not being extractive, right? Like not getting a story just to have a story, right? Because you need to write a book or you need to write your master's thesis, but getting a story because you want to honor the story and give it a place, right? And it's a story that you want to tell. So like I mentioned before, all the figures in the book and the stories in the book are stories that I felt like I had to tell. And the tools that I used to tell them were more theoretically inclined. I'm not saying anthropology is not theoretically inclined, but I'm saying like that was my point of entry to wanting to approach these texts, right? So for me, it's like find your point of entry, right? Like, are you good at teasing out those stories and bringing them out of people? And it looks like you're smiling, so I think that you are. You probably are. So you know, kind of you know, being comfortable with your approach is, I think, the first place to start. And mindful of the ethics around how that looks like when you are generating the stories. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Galarte.
I think we are at the end of this section of inviting students to ask questions. And I just want to be aware of time. It is 5:42. And I want to let people know that we do have a book raffle coming up. So, and we also want to respect Dr. Galarte's time. And so I'm going to pass it on to Profesora Dion Espinosa, who will lead us in the question and answer section. And then afterwards, we will have the book raffle.
Okay, so we had about 5 questions, and I think what I want to do is ask all of them, Dr. Galarte, if that's okay with you, and then you pick one since we're coming to the end of the time, so then we can go to the raffle. And so for folks who are on the line, if you're interested in being considered for the raffle, then please stay on a few more minutes, okay? So here are some of the questions that came up. One, someone asked why you're using the term transsexual as opposed to transgender or trans in the book. Another question was, what is one takeaway that you would like people to get from the book? Someone asked if there was any music you listened to that was particularly inspiring as you were writing. And then we also have a question, how do you begin to address the examination of trans people through the lens of death? And in what ways do we begin to configure our understanding of transgressions as it relates to moving away from social death and towards motion, epistemological interventions, etc.? And I just had one quick point, which is when you're talking about the looking with an X, and someone in the chat affirmed that and said that was a great opening. You know, definitely let me know if I'm going in the wrong direction, but I was thinking about the idea of, you know, people talk about queering text and reading text from a queer lens. So is this transing a text is what you're maybe proposing. Pick any of those questions that speak to you, please.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to tackle a couple really quickly. So why I use transsexual is I try to use it in relationship to the context in which it appears in the book. So when I'm talking about 1969 in that area, in that time period, that's the term that was used the most. But I also think that there's a resurgence in having us to think about transsexuality specifically to kind of remove it from the pathology and to really kind of get at the sexuality of trans, right? So like sex in terms of like how you change your sex, but also sexuality in terms of desire. And there's my colleagues in trans studies are writing about that. And then in terms of what I was listening to in chapter 4, I write about this, the East Side Oldies collection. So I definitely listened to the volume there. And then towards the end of writing the book, I just needed to be quiet, just like Jim was quiet in those photos. And then finally, in terms of how do we, you know, think about trans people through the lens of death or move away from that. In the book, I'm really trying to move in the opposite direction, right? These are folks who have died, and I'm really trying to not read them through their death, but read them related to the context in which they were previously living, right, and building a life, and kind of the relationship between them and the landscapes in the area and the social political climate. So that really kind of opens up a point where we're talking about transgressions. It's not necessarily about transgressions, it's about the transgressions of everyone else and in those contexts that fail these subjects in really sad ways. And when I say fail, it's like where Chicano Mexican masculinity fails Angie Zapata because this man, brutally kills her. And we can think about that in relationship to him, and his masculinity also fails him as how he's read by the jury, right? And how his sexuality is read in the context of the court trial. Because in that chapter, I look at the transcripts, right? So I'm not trying to affirm, or not affirm, but I'm not trying to excavate like a kind of the utmost transgressive trans subject, but rather look at all of the transgressions of those around trans subjects who aren't necessarily really seeing trans subjects in the ways in which trans subjects might live and move through the world. So thank you so much, everyone, for your questions.
I'm handing it back to Professor Rafael.
So we're back to the raffle. So everybody take out your raffle tickets. I'm just kidding. So actually what I would like to do is I would like to invite one of our co-sponsors, and that is the director of the Center for the Studies of Gender and Sexuality, and that's Ren Heinz, who is an assistant professor of English here at Cal State LA. And so they will be leading us in the raffle.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, my name is Ren Heinz, and I'm so excited to be here. It's so good to see you, Frank, and your talk was amazing. Yeah, this was so inspiring. But yeah, the Center for the Study of Gender and Sexualities really wanted to sort of help support this event. So we bought some of Frank's books, and we are going to raffle them off here today. So I don't know if I'm able to share my screen, but I have this like fancy little raffle spin wheel, and I populated the names of everybody who registered. So some folks might not still be here, or maybe registered but weren't able to attend. So we might have to do a few spins around the wheel. But what we're gonna do is, if it lands on your name, you could go ahead and direct message me in the chat, and I'll also put my email in the chat, and you could direct message me your address, and we'll send you a hard copy of Frank's book. So
you can share your screen now.
All right, great. So here we go. And I want to thank Dr. Robertson for tuning me into this like really fun spin wheel thing. Okay, so let's go.
This is so cool, by the way.
Let's go for our first spin here. Okay, is Jessica here?
That's my student.
All right. Well, if Jessica is here, or even if they're not here, you could at least get the information from them. But yeah, congratulations.
Jessica's here.
Okay, great. So I'm gonna write my email in the chat right now, and you can send me your address and you will get a hard copy of the book. All right, so that was the first group of people, and then here we go for the second group.
I love the little sound it makes.
I know. Is Isabel here? Isabel.
Oh, that's a student in that's a student in my class.
Oh, amazing. I'm so happy that the students are winning. All right, well, congrats, Isabel. You also won a book. And so go ahead again and send me a quick email and shoot me your address, and we will get a hard copy of the book off to you. All right. Thank you, everybody. And just a quick shout out, the Center of the Study for Gender and Sexualities just put up our announcement for our conference that's going to be at the end of the semester. And so since everybody here is working in queer studies, trans studies, gender studies, all of you would present amazing papers. And the greatest thing too is that 10 students will win awards of $500 each. So there's a really big incentive to apply to the conference, and hopefully we'll have like panels on Frank. So that's sort of what I'm dreaming of. All right, but thank you everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
I will pass it on to Anita, who will be closing our session.
I just want to again thank everybody. I want to thank one more time Frank's mother and family members that are here. I want to thank everyone who has ever loved you and cared for you, your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, your partner, and all the people who have held you and protected your spirit in academia, especially when spirit murders have tried to hurt you and wound you. So I want to thank all of us who are in that process of trying to hold each other and heal each other, even when things feel hard. And I want to just honor my colegas for the time and the energy that we're putting together to create the spaces that we want in these difficult environments that we are in, both outside of academia and inside of academia. I love you all. I share my love and my energy with all of you who don't feel the love right now. So thank you.
Anita, do we want to take the picture?
Yes, we do. All right. So folks who want to take a picture with Frank, please turn on your camera. Thank you so much. I'm going to take 2 pictures. One will be with all of us, and then one will be, well, it'll be gallery, and then one will be with Frank spotlighted. Okay, spotlit maybe. 1, 2, 3. I'm going to take it again, just in case you closed your eyes. 1, 2, 3. And now, Frank, I'm going to spotlight you. All right. One more time. 1, 2, 3. Gracias, everybody. Take care. Enjoy your evening. Enjoy your weekend. Protect your spirit and keep your fire lit.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Anita, Dr. Revilla, Profe.